It was early morning, the kind of morning where the world feels half awake, half dreaming, and the airport lights glowed softly like stars that refused to sleep. Passengers moved through the terminal, dragging bags, sipping coffee, and glancing at their phones as flight numbers flashed on the big digital board. Among them was Maya Reynolds, a calm, confident woman in her 30s, dressed in jeans, a gray hoodie, and a baseball cap pulled low over her eyes. She wasn't wearing anything that said she was special, yet there was something about the way she carried herself. Quiet, steady, unbothered, like someone who had faced storms before. Maya had flown thousands of hours, not as a passenger, but as a Top Gun-trained pilot, one of the best in her class. She had flown fighter jets that could break the sound barrier, handled missions that tested both courage and precision, and earned the respect of every pilot who had ever shared a cockpit with her. But today she wasn't in uniform, she wasn't in a cockpit, and she wasn't commanding anything except her own peace today. She was just another traveler catching a commercial flight home after visiting her parents. When she reached her gate, she smiled at the boarding agent and quietly took her place in line. A few people gave her a polite nod, others barely noticed her. To them, she was just a regular passenger, a young black woman with a duffel bag and headphones around her neck. And that was fine with Maya. She didn't need anyone to know who she really was. Not yet. Inside the plane, the air smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. The typical scent of travel. The cabin crew greeted passengers warmly. Guiding them to their seats with practiced smiles, Maya found her seat near the window, tucked her bag beneath the seat in front of her, and leaned back with a sigh. Outside the small oval window, dawn was breaking, painting the clouds gold and pink as the aircraft prepared for takeoff. The man sitting next to her was already asleep before the plane even pushed back from the gate. A mother across the aisle was soothing a fussy toddler. Whispering lullabies in a tired voice, flight attendants moved gracefully down the aisle, checking seatbelts and reminding passengers to switch their phones to airplane mode. Maya slipped on her headphones and closed her eyes, letting the gentle hum of the engines become a lullaby of its own. For most passengers, a flight was just a routine trip, a few hours of boredom between takeoff and landing. But for Maya, even as a passenger, every vibration, every small sound of the plane spoke a language she knew by heart. She could tell the difference between the engine's idle hum and the thrust before liftoff. She could feel in her bones when the plane was climbing smoothly and when it hit a pocket of rough air. Still, she tried to let go, to just be. It wasn't easy for someone used to being in control of the skies to sit still and let someone else fly the plane. But she smiled to herself. This was her rare chance to rest, to be anonymous, to breathe without responsibility. Outside, the runway stretched like a long silver ribbon, and the captain's voice came through the speakers. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. Welcome aboard Flight 732 to San Diego. We expect a smooth flight today." The sound made Maya's heart flutter in a familiar way, not out of excitement, but from a deep connection to the world of aviation. As the plane began to taxi, she tilted her head back, feeling the soft vibration under her feet. The engines roared, powerful yet controlled, and with a gentle surge, the aircraft lifted off the ground. The city below turned into a patchwork of lights, shrinking smaller and smaller as they rose into the clouds. Maya watched for a moment, then closed her eyes again. Letting herself drift into light sleep, she thought about how strange life could be. One day, she was flying a fighter jet at supersonic speed, and another day, she was sitting quietly among strangers on a commercial flight. No one around her knew her story, her years of training, or the pressure she had faced to prove herself in a world that didn't always expect someone who looked like her to succeed. She remembered long nights in the hangar, instructors testing her limits, and the satisfaction of every perfect landing. It wasn't an easy journey, but every challenge had made her stronger, sharper and calmer under pressure as she dozed. Her mind wandered between dreams and memories, and skies stretching forever, engines roaring, the rush of wind against her canopy. Now all she heard was the soft hum of this peaceful cabin, and for once she allowed herself to relax completely. Around her, passengers read books, watched movies, or scrolled through their phones, unaware that one of the most skilled pilots in the country sat quietly among them. The morning sun bathed the cabin in warm light, and everything seemed perfect, ordinary, calm. No one knew that a few hours later, this calm would break. That turbulence would shake both the plane and people's assumptions, and when a nervous flight attendant would wake Maya from her rest, She would speak words that would silence a cabin and inspire thousands afterward. But for now there was only peace, the soft hum of the engines, the clouds outside glowing like cotton candy, and a quiet pilot sitting in row 17, content to let someone else fly, just this once. The plane had been in the air for almost 2 hours. Cruising peacefully above the clouds, most passengers were relaxed now, sipping drinks or watching movies on their seat screens. The sunlight outside was bright and golden, turning the sky into a sea of calm. Maya was still resting with her eyes closed, her headphones playing soft music, her breathing slow and even. Then, without warning, the peace began to change. The aircraft gave a sudden jolt, not too harsh at first, but enough to make people glance up from their screens. A few nervous laughs broke out, the kind people use when they're pretending not to be scared. The captain's voice hadn't come over the speakers yet, which made the silence between bumps feel heavier. Another shudder ran through the cabin, this one sharper. Coffee spilled from cups. A few gasps echoed through the aisles. The mother with the toddler held her child closer, whispering softly to keep them calm. The man next to Maya muttered something under his breath and tightened his seatbelt. The plane dipped slightly, then steadied again, the engines humming louder than before. Maya opened her eyes slowly, her calm face giving away little emotion. She could tell from the vibration under her seat that this wasn't ordinary turbulence. It wasn't dangerous yet, but it was rougher than usual. Something about the air current felt unpredictable. She looked out the window. The clouds were thicker now, darker at the edges. She knew they had flown into a storm pocket, one of those invisible traps pilots always watch for. A flight attendant moved quickly down the aisle, her steps slightly unsteady as the floor shook again. She smiled tightly at the passengers, the kind of smile that hides worry. "Please fasten your seatbelts and remain seated," she said in a trained, calm tone. Her voice was steady, but her eyes darted toward the cockpit for reassurance. The captain's voice came through the speakers just then. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a bit of turbulence. Please stay seated and we'll get through this shortly." It was the kind of message that was meant to comfort, but Maya could hear the edge of strain in his voice. The plane jolted harder this time, and a loud metallic creak echoed from somewhere deep inside the fuselage. Several passengers gasped. One woman let out a small cry. The lights flickered once, then steadied, the air suddenly feeling thinner. The seatbelt signs glowed bright, and the crew began to move quickly. Securing loose items, Maya watched quietly, her mind already analyzing what might be happening. It was instinct. Years of training had wired her to think like a pilot even when she wasn't flying. She noticed how the right wing dipped slightly more than the left after each shake. That meant crosswind turbulence or possibly wind shear, strong currents hitting from uneven angles. Her heartbeat stayed slow, calm, measured, but her senses were sharp now. She took off her headphones and listened carefully to the rhythm of the engines. Every hum, every shift in sound told her something about what was going on outside. The flight attendant returned from the front, checking rows one by one. When she reached Maya's row, she noticed Maya's eyes closed again, her posture relaxed. At that moment, the plane gave another sudden drop, not long, but strong enough to make everyone's stomachs flip. "Ma'am," the attendant said urgently, tapping Maya's shoulder, "please wake up. We might need assistance." Maya opened her eyes, her gaze steady and focused, the calm of someone who had seen much worse in the sky. "What's the situation?" she asked quietly. The attendant blinked, surprised at the calm tone. "The captain just asked if there's anyone on board with flight or aviation experience. One of our co-pilots is feeling unwell and—" She hesitated, glancing nervously toward the cockpit. "We're in a difficult patch." The passenger beside Maya turned his head, his eyes wide. "Wait, is something wrong with the pilots?" he whispered. The flight attendant forced a smile. "Everything's under control, sir." But her trembling hands told a different story. Maya took a deep breath, her voice firm but kind. "Tell the captain there's a Top Gun-trained pilot on board." For a second, the attendant just stared, not sure if she had heard correctly. "You're a pilot?" she asked softly, her disbelief clear. Maya nodded once. "Yes, fighter jets, years of experience, and now tell me what's going on." The woman's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She looked around as if confirming that this calm, humble-looking passenger was really saying what she was hearing. The passengers nearby started to whisper. Some were curious, others skeptical. But there was something in Maya's tone, quiet authority that silenced the doubt before it spread too far. The attendant nodded quickly, her professional instincts taking over again. "Please come with me," she said, motioning toward the cockpit. As Maya stood, the plane shook again, harder this time, a suitcase rattling in the overhead bin. She steadied herself with one hand on the seat, her movements smooth and precise. People watched her as she walked down the aisle, her presence commanding without trying. The flight attendants stepped aside, relief already showing in their faces. They didn't know who she was, but they could sense she was someone who belonged in control. Inside the cockpit, the tension was thick, alarms blinking softly, the co-pilot pale and sweating. Maya's mind switched instantly into pilot mode, assessing every sound, every flicker, every reading. She wasn't there to take over. She was there to help, to stabilize, to bring calm where fear had taken hold. Outside, the clouds thickened, lightning flashing faintly in the distance. But for Maya, this wasn't chaos, it was familiar ground. This was where she thrived, in the storm, in the pressure, in the sky. And for the first time on that flight, everyone aboard was about to see who she truly was. The cockpit door clicked shut behind Maya, and for a brief second, the world outside the small space seemed to disappear. Inside, it was dim, the glow of buttons and screens reflecting off metal and glass. The captain sat forward, hands gripping the controls, sweat glistening at his temples. Beside him, the co-pilot looked pale, his breathing shallow, his focus fading. One glance told Maya everything she needed to know. "Captain Reynolds, Top Gun pilot," she said quickly, her voice even but commanding. "I'm certified and current. What's your situation?" The captain's eyes flicked toward her in surprise, then relief. He nodded sharply. "We hit a sudden crosswind and lost partial control on our lateral stabilizer. My co-pilot's unwell and I could use a second set of hands." His voice trembled slightly, but he was holding it together. Maya slid into the jump seat without hesitation, her movements smooth, confident, and precise. Every sound, every vibration, every flashing light spoke to her. She'd trained for years to make decisions in seconds, and her instincts had never failed her. "Okay," she said softly, scanning the instruments. "You've got uneven lift from the right wing, reduced throttle 2%. I'll monitor your yaw." The captain followed instantly, trust forming between them in silence. Outside, the storm clouds thickened, gray swallowing the horizon. Lightning flashed faintly in the distance, the plane bumping as if the sky itself was restless. In the cabin, passengers clutched armrests and whispered prayers, unaware that one of the most skilled pilots alive was guiding them through the chaos. Maya's calmness was like a shield, her tone steady, her eyes sharp, her breathing controlled, altitude holding steady. "Course correcting," she said quietly, and the captain exhaled, a long breath of gratitude. Meanwhile, the flight attendant who had woken Maya stood near the cockpit door. Listening to the muffled voices inside, she still couldn't believe what was happening. A few minutes ago, she'd tapped a sleeping passenger. Now that same woman was helping fly the plane. Her heart raced as she peeked toward the passengers. Most of them were anxious, unaware of the details. She knew she couldn't tell them yet, but inside, she felt something change, respect, or maybe even guilt back in the cockpit. Maya's fingers moved swiftly across the controls. "Stabilizer is responding," she said. "Trim input steady, good recovery path. Keep her steady at 29,000 feet. The captain nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "How long have you been flying?" he asked, trying to fill the tense air with human words. "Since I was 21, she replied, eyes still focused. FA-18s mostly. Training and combat support," he blinked, impressed. "Top Gun?" She gave a half smile. "Class of 2013. For a few seconds. Silence filled the space, the good kind. The kind that means everything's under control. The instruments leveled out. The readings stable again. The storm now behind them. The captain adjusted the autopilot and turned to her. "You just saved us a serious issue." Maya shook her head gently. "You already had it under control, I just steadied the storm." In the cabin, the turbulence eased, the plane smoothed out, and passengers began to loosen their grips on the seats. The mother with the toddler kissed her child's forehead, whispering a thank you to no one in particular. The man who'd been muttering before leaned back, letting out a shaky laugh, and the flight attendants exchanged silent glances of relief. They didn't know the full story yet, but they knew something extraordinary had happened. After a few minutes, the captain made a calm announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've passed through some turbulence. Everything is stable now, thank you for your patience. His voice was steady. Confident, the fear now gone, applause broke out in the cabin. Soft but sincere, a small celebration of relief. Maya could hear it faintly from the cockpit, and a small smile touched her lips. She sat back in the jump seat, watching the horizon clear through the front glass. The sky stretched endlessly ahead, blue and calm again. For her, it was a familiar view, one she had loved since she was a little girl watching jets streak across the sky. She remembered her first solo flight, the way her heart had raced and then settled as she touched the clouds. Back then, people had doubted her too, said she was too quiet, too gentle, too different to handle military aviation. But she had learned that strength wasn't loud. It was steady, and once again, here she was, proving it, without shouting, without bragging, just doing what needed to be done. The captain turned toward her, his tone now respectful. "You should be in the front seat more often," he said with a chuckle. Maya smiled softly. "Sometimes it's nice to let someone else fly." He nodded. "Not today." They shared a brief, wordless moment of understanding. Two pilots who spoke the same unspoken language of the sky. When Maya finally stepped out of the cockpit, the flight attendant straightened immediately, her eyes wide with a mix of relief and admiration. "Is everything okay now?" she asked quickly. Maya nodded. "It's stable. You all did good work." The woman hesitated, then said quietly, I'm sorry I woke you like that. I didn't know who you were." Maya smiled kindly. "You did exactly what you were supposed to. And I did what I was trained to do." Then she added, almost like a secret, "That's what teamwork looks like at 30,000 feet." As she walked back down the aisle, passengers turned their heads slightly. Some recognized her from before. Others simply sensed that something important had just happened. She sat back in her seat, pulled her hoodie over her head again, and looked out the window. The clouds were breaking apart, sunlight pouring through, bright and warm. No one clapped for her. No cameras flashed, but none of that mattered. She didn't need applause. The clear sky outside was her reward. She closed her eyes again, not to sleep, but to feel the quiet peace that comes after the storm. When Maya stepped back into the cabin, everything felt different. The same aisle she had walked through quietly before now carried a silent kind of attention. Passengers didn't know exactly what had happened, but they could feel that something big had just unfolded behind that cockpit door. The air felt lighter, but also full of curiosity. Like a secret waiting to be spoken aloud, Maya walked calmly to her seat, her steps steady, her face calm as ever. She didn't look around or seek anyone's reaction. She just moved with the same quiet strength she always carried. The flight attendant who had called her earlier followed a few steps behind, still watching her with wide eyes. She wanted to say something, anything, but the right words didn't come yet. When Maya sat down, the man next to her leaned slightly over, his voice low but eager. "Were you just helping the pilots?" he asked. His tone filled with awe and disbelief. Maya gave a soft smile. "Just lending a hand," she said simply. His mouth dropped open slightly. "Lending a hand," he repeated. "Ma'am, you were in the cockpit during turbulence. That's not just helping." Maya chuckled quietly, shaking her head. Sometimes a little calm is all that's needed. The people in nearby rows started whispering. Word spread fast. A passenger had gone into the cockpit, helped the captain, and now everything was fine. Some said she was a flight engineer. Others guessed she was an air marshal. But the truth was far beyond what anyone imagined. A few minutes later, the head flight attendant approached Maya again, her expression softer now, almost shy. "Excuse me, ma'am," she began, her voice quiet enough so others couldn't hear. "The captain wanted me to thank you again. He said you handled things like a professional." Maya nodded gently. "He's a good pilot. He had it under control." The woman hesitated, then asked, "If you don't mind me asking, are you really a pilot?" Maya turned to her fully now, her eyes warm but confident. "Yes, I am," she said. "United States Navy Top Gun program." The flight attendant blinked, processing the words. "Top Gun," she repeated softly, almost like she didn't believe what she just heard. Maya nodded once, calm as ever. "That's right." There was a long pause before the woman found her voice again. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wake you earlier. I just panicked." Maya's smile was kind. "You did your job, and you did it well." she said. "You woke the right person at the right time." The woman's throat tightened as emotion caught up to her. In that moment she realized how quickly she had judged. Seeing only an ordinary woman resting in a hoodie, she hadn't seen the years of discipline, training, and courage that rested behind those calm eyes. She felt both humbled and grateful. It wasn't often that a real-life hero sat quietly in row 17, drinking water and minding her own business. A young boy from 2 rows ahead turned around, curious. "Mom," he whispered loudly, "is she the pilot lady?" His mother hushed him quickly, but Maya smiled and gave the boy a small nod. The boy's eyes lit up. "That's so cool," he said in pure excitement, and even a few nearby passengers smiled, the tension breaking. Within minutes, small conversations filled the air again. People were still whispering, but now there was admiration in their tones, not fear. The same woman who had once seemed invisible now carried a quiet spotlight. Not the kind you ask for, but the kind that finds you when you simply do the right thing. Maya leaned her head back against the seat, looking out the window at the endless sky. The clouds had cleared now, and sunlight streamed through like golden silk. She loved that light, the same light she'd chased in a fighter jet thousands of feet higher than this. Up there it always felt like freedom, and down here it reminded her that even on an ordinary day, purpose has a way of finding you. The flight attendant came back once more holding a small cup of coffee. "For you," she said softly, "from the crew." Maya accepted it with a smile. "Thank you." The woman hesitated, then leaned closer, whispering, "I just want to say, you changed how I see people." Maya's expression softened. "We all wear different uniforms," she said quietly, "but they don't always show on the outside." As the flight went on, peace returned to the cabin completely. Children laughed again, people chatted, and the nervous energy faded like a distant storm. But every now and then someone's eyes would drift toward Maya, not in curiosity anymore, but in quiet respect. They saw her not just as a passenger, but as a symbol of something powerful. Calm strength, quiet excellence, and the beauty of not needing to prove yourself to anyone. The captain made another announcement near the end of the flight. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent shortly. We'd like to thank all of you for your patience today, and a special thanks to one of our passengers who lent us her expertise." He didn't say her name, but every person in that cabin turned slightly toward Maya. She smiled faintly, eyes still on the clouds, as if she hadn't heard. It wasn't about being seen or thanked. It was about knowing she had done what needed to be done. As the plane began to descend, the city lights below shimmered like gold dust. Maya felt a quiet sense of peace. She thought about how life has a funny way of reminding you who you are, even when you try to take a break from it. She had just wanted a simple flight, some rest, maybe a nap. Instead, the skies had reminded her that a pilot never really stops being one. It's not a job. It's who you are, even when you're sitting in row 17, wearing a hoodie and just trying to sleep. The wheels touched down smoothly, and a gentle applause filled the cabin. People smiled, nodded, whispered their thanks. Maya sat quietly, watching the runway roll past the window. She wasn't a celebrity or a name on a headline. She was something rarer. She was a quiet hero in plain clothes, someone who let her actions speak louder than anything else ever could. The plane was quiet again, yet the air inside carried a new kind of energy. It wasn't fear anymore. It was respect, mixed with curiosity, mixed with wonder. Every passenger now knew that the calm black woman in the gray hoodie was no ordinary traveler. She was the reason the flight was steady, the reason everyone could relax again. But Maya didn't think about that. She just sat quietly, her mind still half in the cockpit. When you've flown fighter jets at supersonic speeds, your senses never really turn off. Even when you're not at the controls, your mind listens. To the hum of engines, to the rhythm of air, to the heartbeat of the sky itself. That's how Maya was wired, and that's what made her special. Not just her training, but her presence. That calm, commanding aura that made people feel safe without her even trying. The head flight attendant walked past again, stopping beside Maya's seat. "We're still adjusting our route a little, but the captain said we should be in clear air soon," she said softly. Maya nodded. "Good call," she replied, her tone light but sure. The attendant lingered for a moment, then whispered, "The crew can't stop talking about you." Maya smiled faintly. "Tell them it was teamwork. I just did my part." But deep down everyone knew there was more to it than that. When panic hits 30,000 feet, calmness spreads faster than fear. But only if it comes from the right person. And Maya's calm was different. It wasn't forced. It wasn't fake. It came from experience, from the kind of courage that's been tested in real storms. Her body language alone said everything: steady posture, focused eyes, quiet confidence. Even when she spoke softly, her words carried weight. Like someone used to being obeyed, not out of fear, but out of trust. A small group of passengers nearby started talking quietly. One said, "I've never seen someone so calm in turbulence." Another replied, "I heard she was military." A third leaned in and whispered, "Top Gun. Can you believe that?" The whispers weren't about gossip anymore. They were about awe, about the kind of respect that doesn't need applause. The turbulence began again, but softer this time, gentle waves instead of sharp jolts. Maya instinctively straightened in her seat, her eyes flicking toward the wings outside the window. She could read the movement like a language. The aircraft was being guided around a weather pocket, a smart maneuver by the captain. She smiled slightly, appreciating the pilot's skill, knowing he'd regained full control. The captain's voice came over the speaker, calm and confident now. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be flying at a slightly lower altitude to avoid remaining turbulence. Thank you for your patience." The entire cabin seemed to breathe together, relief washing over them. Maya closed her eyes, but her posture stayed upright, alert. Even resting, she radiated control, the quiet kind that makes others feel safe just by being near it. The same flight attendant from earlier came by with drinks, her hands no longer shaking. When she reached Maya, she paused. "Ma'am, may I ask you something personal?" Maya opened her eyes, nodding gently. "Sure." The woman hesitated, then said, "When you were up there, weren't you scared?" Maya thought for a moment before answering. "Of course I was," she said softly. "Every pilot feels fear. The trick isn't to ignore it, it's to control it." Her tone was so calm, so sure, that even the nearby passengers went quiet, listening. "Fear keeps you sharp," she continued. "But panic makes you blind, and I never let fear turn into panic." The flight attendant nodded slowly, her eyes shining. "That's incredible." Maya smiled. "It's training, discipline and faith, in your crew, in your machine, in yourself." Her words hung in the air like truth you didn't need to question, because everyone could see she lived by them. Even the little boy from earlier was listening from his seat ahead. His small face turned toward her. He whispered to his mom, "She sounds like a superhero." Maya overheard it and chuckled softly. "No, sweetheart," she said gently. "Superheroes wear capes. I just wear a flight suit." The boy grinned, and his mom smiled too. Moments like that made everything worthwhile for Maya, knowing that one child might dream bigger because of a quiet conversation mid-air. As the flight continued, the crew moved more confidently, their steps surer, their laughter returning. Maya had given them something powerful. Belief, not because she took charge of the plane, but because she showed them what calm leadership looks like when everything shakes. In her silence, they found steadiness. In her few words, they found focus, and that was her real command, not from rank or uniform, but from presence. When the captain invited her back to the cockpit briefly to discuss the descent, she agreed. He greeted her with a grateful smile. "I've flown for 20 years, he said, but I've never seen anyone handle stress like you just did." Maya smiled. "You've handled it too. Every flight teaches us something new." He nodded. "Today, I learned that heroes don't always wear stripes on their shoulders." She looked out the cockpit window, the blue horizon stretching endlessly ahead, and replied softly, The sky doesn't care about ranks. It only listens to those who respect it. Back in her seat as the plane began its descent, the light through the window turned golden. The clouds glowed like fire in the distance. Fading into the sunset, Maya watched quietly, feeling the familiar hum of the engines. That sound always brought her peace. A sound that reminded her she belonged here, among the clouds, among the steady and the brave. As the plane descended through the final stretch, the captain's voice returned one last time. Ladies and gentlemen, as we approach landing, please stay seated. And let me personally thank our special passenger again for her assistance today. This time, the cabin clapped louder than before. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't forced, and it was pure, grateful, human. Maya lowered her head slightly, embarrassed but touched, her quiet smile returning. She had shown them something rare. That true command doesn't come from shouting orders, but from staying calm when others can't. She had reminded them that strength can be soft and power can be silent. And as the wheels touched the runway and the applause faded, everyone on that flight knew one thing for sure. They had flown with a real pilot, a real leader, a real hero, one who led not from the front of the plane, but from her heart. The moment the wheels touched the runway, a soft vibration moved through the cabin. It wasn't just the sound of landing, it was the sound of relief, the sound of safety, the sound of hundreds of hearts breathing together again. Outside, the sky had dimmed into orange and gold, the kind of light that makes the world look calm again. Inside, people smiled at strangers, nodded at flight attendants, and whispered small words of thanks to no one in particular. Maya sat still, her hands folded, her gaze steady out the window. She watched the runway lights flicker past like glowing beads on a dark string. Her reflection in the window looked tired but peaceful, the kind of peace that comes only after doing something meaningful. The engines began to slow, the plane rolling gently toward the gate, and as it did, the passengers began to do what people always do after fear. They talked, they laughed softly, they returned to life. But even among the noise, something was different. People looked at Maya not with curiosity now, but with quiet respect. There was no shouting, no camera flashes, no dramatic moment. Just a shared understanding that they had been protected by someone extraordinary. The little boy from earlier peeked over his seat again. Waving shyly, Maya smiled and gave him a small salute, and his grin grew wide like he'd just met his favorite hero. The captain made his final announcement, his voice filled with warmth. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Diego. We'd like to extend our special thanks to one of our passengers, Captain Maya Reynolds, for her calm professionalism today. Her name echoed softly through the cabin, and for a brief moment everything went still. Then the applause began, not loud or chaotic, but heartfelt, slow, and full of gratitude. Maya didn't look around. She just nodded once, her eyes on the floor, her humility shining brighter than any spotlight ever could. The flight attendant who had woken her earlier walked up to her seat, her eyes glistening. "Captain Reynolds," she said quietly, "on behalf of the crew." "Thank you." Maya looked up and smiled gently. "You did great up there," she said. "I've seen trained crews freeze in smaller storms. You didn't." The woman shook her head, her voice trembling. "I almost made a mistake. I judged you before I knew you. I saw just a passenger, not the pilot behind the hoodie." Maya's eyes softened. "We all do that sometimes," she said. "The important thing is how fast we correct course." The woman laughed quietly through her tears. "You really do talk like a pilot," Maya smiled. "It's hard to turn it off," she said, her voice full of warmth. She stood, reaching for her duffel bag, and the attendant hesitated before asking, "Can I hug you?" Maya chuckled softly. "Sure," she said, and they shared a brief, heartfelt hug. It wasn't dramatic, it was human, honest, real, the kind of connection that lingers long after the flight ends. As the passengers began to file out, several stopped by Maya's seat. A man in a suit said quietly, "Thank you for what you did. My daughter's on this flight. I'll never forget this," a young woman with earbuds whispered. "You inspired me, ma'am. I didn't think women could be fighter pilot." Maya smiled at her. "We can be anything," she said simply, and each word carried a weight of truth, the kind that stays with people long after they leave. The little boy and his mother were among the last to pass. The boy held a toy plane in his hand, looking up with wide eyes. "My mom says you're a real pilot," he said. Maya crouched slightly, her voice soft. "That's right, kiddo," he grinned. "When I grow up, I want to fly planes too." Maya touched his shoulder gently. Then keep dreaming. And don't let anyone tell you you can't. The boy nodded, holding on to his toy like it was the most important thing in the world. When the cabin finally emptied, Maya remained seated for a moment longer. The quiet after the crowd felt heavier but also peaceful. She looked around, the rows of empty seats, the soft light spilling through the windows, the faint echo of footsteps leaving. It reminded her of the silence after a successful mission. When everything finally settles, no music, no medals, no speeches. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing you did your part. The captain stepped out from the cockpit one last time. His hat in his hand, he smiled. You'll always have a place in my logbook. Captain Reynolds. Maya chuckled. Let's hope the next flight doesn't need me. He laughed. Fair enough, then added softly. It was an honor flying with you. Maya nodded. The honor was mine, Captain. As she stepped out of the plane, the evening breeze touched her face, warm and fresh. The runway lights sparkled in the distance, the air carrying that familiar scent of jet fuel and ocean wind. It was a smell she knew well, the smell of her second home, the sky. For a moment she paused near the gate window, watching the aircraft she'd just helped land. It looked peaceful now, resting, waiting for its next journey, and Maya smiled to herself, thinking how every flight, every mission, every life saved is part of a bigger story. She didn't need applause or headlines. The respect she earned wasn't written in news articles. It was written in hearts. In quiet looks, in whispered thank yous, she carried that kind of respect wherever she went. The kind built not by ego, but by grace, and as she walked down the terminal, blending back into the crowd like any other traveler, she knew that her calm, her presence, her command would be remembered. Not because she demanded it, but because she lived it. And somewhere high above the clouds, the sky seemed to whisper her name in gratitude. The airport terminal buzzed with life, people rushing to their next gates, announcements echoing through the air, luggage wheels rolling across the polished floor. Yet in the middle of all that noise, Maya walked slowly, her duffel bag slung over one shoulder, her steps calm and unhurried. She had just walked away from the flight that could have gone very differently, but no one looking at her now would have guessed it. She looked like any other traveler, tired but peaceful, quiet but focused, and that was exactly how she liked it. Behind her, the passengers from her flight were still talking. Some were calling family members, voices filled with emotion. Others were posting about the experience online, describing the calm woman who had stepped into the cockpit and changed everything. But Maya didn't stop to listen or look back. She'd never cared for attention. She just cared about doing the right thing. As she passed by a cafe window, she caught a glimpse of herself in the glass. Her reflection looked steady, the same as always, in confident eyes, calm posture, and a quiet smile that hinted at strength. She thought about the moment the flight attendant had tapped her shoulder, about how fast things had shifted from routine to crisis, and then she thought about how quickly everyone had come together. That's what flying had taught her all those years. In the air, no one wins alone. She remembered her first mission as a Navy pilot, the roar of the engines, the vibration through her bones, the sheer force of power and fear mixed together. Back then she was younger, hungrier, still learning what it meant to be trusted with lives. Her instructor had told her something she'd never forgotten. Real pilots don't just fly planes, they carry people's hopes, their fears and their faith every time they take off. And today, sitting in row 17 of a commercial jet, she'd lived that truth all over again. Outside the terminal window, another plane was taking off. Maya stopped for a moment to watch it, the engines roaring as it lifted gracefully into the golden sky. There was something about that moment that always moved her. The way machines and human will combined to defy gravity. It was a reminder that no matter how heavy life felt, there was always a way up, always a way to rise. A young woman approached her shyly, holding a phone in her hand. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said softly. "You were on flight 732. Right." Maya turned and smiled. "Yes." The girl hesitated, then said, "I was in row 9. I saw everything. I just wanted to say thank you." Maya nodded. "You're welcome," she said kindly. The girl looked nervous but curious. "Can I ask, how did you stay so calm?" Maya thought for a moment, then said, "Because panic never fixes anything, and calm isn't the absence of fear. It's control over it." The girl's eyes widened, her shoulders relaxed. That's powerful," she said quietly. Maya smiled. "You'll need calm one day too, everyone does." They said goodbye. And as the young woman walked away, Maya could see the spark in her eyes. It was the same spark Maya once had when she met her first female pilot years ago. A spark of realization that maybe, just maybe, she could do something great too. Maya kept walking until she reached the baggage area. There were people everywhere, hugging, laughing, crying, reuniting after long trips. She watched them quietly, and a deep sense of gratitude filled her chest. She had spent years flying missions for her country, training young pilots, facing the kind of storms that break weaker spirits. But today felt different. Today she had touched lives not in the skies of war or training, but in the simple human way of keeping people safe. As she waited for her bag, her phone buzzed with a message from one of her old squadron friends. It said, "Heard what happened. Word travels fast. Proud of you, Captain." Maya smiled, typing back, "Just another day in the clouds." Her friend replied instantly, "You've still got it." She slipped her phone back into her pocket, her smile deepening. Maybe she did still have it. The instincts, the calm, the quiet confidence that had once earned her a place among the best. When her bag arrived, she grabbed it and headed toward the exit. The sun outside was low now, casting long shadows across the pavement. She took a deep breath, the air warm and salty from the nearby coast. San Diego always smelled like the sea, like freedom, like memory, like home. She could hear planes taking off in the distance, each one roaring towards some new horizon. It reminded her that the world never stops moving, and neither did she before leaving the airport. She paused once more to look up at the sky. It stretched wide and endless, painted with streaks of orange and pink. To anyone else, it was just a sunset, but to Maya, it was something sacred. It was a reminder that the same sky that holds storms also holds peace, that the same clouds that bring turbulence can also cradle light, and that sometimes, being a pilot isn't about flying. It's about staying steady when others can't. She whispered quietly to herself. Every landing is a new beginning. And as she walked toward the parking lot, the last rays of sunlight glinted off her small navy keychain. It was old, scratched, but it still carried the words she'd lived by all her life. Honor, courage, commitment. She touched it gently, feeling the weight of it, the truth of it. Those weren't just words for her, they were a way of living. And even though she wasn't wearing her uniform today, she was still serving, in her own way, in her own quiet mission. As she disappeared into the golden light of evening, the sky behind her shifted from gold to deep blue. A new flight roared above, heading toward the stars. And somewhere in that vast, endless sky, Maya's spirit seemed to rise with it, because no matter where she went, the sky would always know her name and she would always belong to it. By the time Maya reached home, the sky had turned deep blue, the last traces of sunset fading into twilight. She dropped her bag near the door and stood still for a moment, letting the silence wrap around her. Her small apartment overlooked the city skyline, lights twinkling like stars scattered across the ground. It was peaceful, the kind of peace that comes after a storm. When the world finally exhales, she made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, her body tired but her heart full. Outside, she could still see planes crossing the dark sky, tiny silver streaks with red lights blinking softly. Every time she looked at them, she felt the same sense of connection, that invisible bond between all who dared to fly. It didn't matter what kind of plane it was, military jet, commercial liner, or a small training craft. Every pilot knew what it meant to carry trust, to hold lives in their hands, to stay calm when the sky turned rough. Her phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with messages. Friends from the Navy, fellow pilots, even strangers, all sending words of pride and admiration. She scrolled through a few and smiled quietly. One message stood out from her old flight instructor. It said, "You may have retired from active duty, but you never stopped serving." Maya read it twice, her chest tightening with emotion. That sentence was everything she believed in. That purpose doesn't end when the uniform comes off. Meanwhile, the story of the flight had begun to spread. A passenger had shared a post online, describing the moment the flight attendant woke a woman during turbulence. How the woman calmly said, "I'm a Top Gun pilot," and how silence fell across the cabin within hours. The story began to travel, shared, liked, retold, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. Because people were hungry for stories of quiet strength, stories that reminded them courage doesn't need a spotlight. Maya didn't know about it at first. She wasn't scrolling for fame. But as days passed, more people began to talk. News anchors mentioned the mystery Top Gun pilot who saved a commercial flight. Aviation forums discussed her training background. Others called her a role model. Her old Navy base even posted an article celebrating her calm under pressure. Still, Maya stayed silent. She didn't post, didn't correct, didn't chase attention. She simply lived for her. The story wasn't about her name, it was about the message. One afternoon, she received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from a young girl named Jasmine, age 10, written in careful handwriting. It read, "Dear Captain Maya, my mom showed me the video about you. I didn't know girls could be pilots. Now I want to fly too." Maya read it 3 times, her eyes stinging with tears she didn't expect. She placed the letter on her desk, next to her old Navy wings for a long time. She just looked at them, the wings, the letter, the sky outside. And she smiled, realizing that her true flight had just begun, not in the air, but in the hearts of those she'd inspired. Weeks passed, but people still remembered. Pilots mentioned her story in training sessions. Teachers used it to talk about perseverance and leadership. And little girls, many of them, began drawing pictures of planes with women in the cockpit. Maya didn't see all of it, but she felt it. That quiet ripple moving through the world. She had learned long ago that legacy isn't noise. It's motion. It's what continues long after you stop speaking. One evening, she was invited to a small aviation event. She wasn't a keynote speaker, just a guest. But when she walked in, a hush fell over the room. People recognized her not from fame, but from the way she carried herself, steady, grounded, kind. The event host asked her if she'd like to say a few words. She hesitated, then stepped forward, her voice calm but filled with warmth. "I didn't save a flight," she began. "I just did what I was trained to do." She paused, looking around the room, faces young and old listening intently. "The real story isn't about me. It's about what calmness can do, what teamwork can do, what faith can do at 30,000 feet. Her words settled over the crowd like a blanket, soft, but powerful. And in that moment, every person there understood that heroism doesn't always wear medals. Sometimes it just wears humility. After the event, she stepped outside, the night air cool against her skin. Above her, the stars stretched endlessly, the same stars she'd once flown under. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes for a moment. Memories of roaring engines, narrow escapes, and blue horizons filled her mind. But among all those memories, one stood out. The simple flight where she sat as a passenger and still found herself leading. It reminded her that purpose isn't something you leave behind. It's something you carry quietly. Always back home, she placed Jasmine's letter in a small wooden box labeled Wings and Words. Inside were a few medals, patches, photos, and keepsakes from her years in the Navy. She ran her fingers over them, her heart full of gratitude. Then she looked out the window once more, watching another plane slice through the night sky. Its lights blinked rhythmically, steady and sure, and she whispered softly, "Fly safe up there." The world would go on. Storms would come and go, skies would change, but Maya's calm, her courage, her grace, they would linger in stories told in classrooms, in flight schools, in quiet homes. She had become more than a pilot that day. She had become a reminder that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply rises, and as the stars shone brighter above the city, the sky seemed to carry her legacy forward, whispering her story over the clouds, over the wings, over every flight that dared to climb higher. Because some heroes never land, they just keep flying on forever.